entitled Officer Harasses Black Driver, then gets the shock of his life. The rain turned the world into a blurry watercolor. Marcus's wipers fought a losing battle, smearing the reflections of streetlights across his windshield. He checked his watch, 7:58 p.m. The investor presentation started in 2 minutes. Damn. A wave of anxiety washed over him. This meeting was everything. Suddenly, the harsh glare of headlights filled his rearview mirror. A cruiser, all aggressive angles and flashing red and blue, locked onto his bumper. Marcus sighed. This was a complication he couldn't afford. He signaled, carefully pulling his black sedan onto the shoulder. The officer who emerged was young, almost boyish, but his face wore a practiced mask of authority. Officer Davies. He adjusted his belt, a nervous tick, his hand lingering near his holster. The rain plastered his uniform to his chest. Davies leaned in, his face too close to the open window. "License and registration, sir," he snapped, his voice tight, almost strained. Marcus reached for his wallet, trying to project the calm he didn't feel. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" Davies's eyes darted around the interior of the car, lingering for a moment on Marcus's expensive watch. "Just routine." "Move it along." Marcus handed him the documents. Davies snatched them, their fingers brushing, a brief, awkward moment. He retreated to his cruiser, disappearing into the glow of the dashboard lights. Minutes crawled by. Marcus watched Davies type, the glow of the screen illuminating the officer's tense jaw. He occasionally glanced back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The rain intensified, a relentless drumming on the roof. Finally, Davies emerged, the mask of authority firmly back in place. He approached the car, his posture rigid. "Everything checks out," he said, tossing the documents back at Marcus. "Too bad for you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Officer, with all due respect, I am late for a very important meeting. If there's nothing else." Davies leaned closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Oh, there is. That taillight is cracked. Vehicle code violation. And," he lowered his voice, a hint of something darker creeping in, "I saw you weaving back there. Had a few, have we?" Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "I haven't had anything to drink tonight, officer. The crack is small, it doesn't obstruct the light, and the road's slick." Davies chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "That's not how I see it. Step out of the vehicle." Marcus had built his life on defying expectations. Born in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, he'd learned early on that hard work was the only currency that truly mattered. He'd earned scholarships, graduated top of his class, and built Innovate Solutions from the ground up. His success wasn't just about him. It was about showing others that it was possible. Innovate Solutions wasn't just a job, it was his legacy. He poured everything into it, building a team that reflected his values: innovation, integrity, and inclusion. The meeting tonight with the investor was the culmination of years of effort, a chance to secure the company's future and expand its reach. He knew David Miller, his COO and closest friend, was already at the venue, juggling appetizers and nervous investors. Marcus valued fairness above all. He'd faced his share of prejudice, the subtle slights and assumptions that chipped away at your confidence. He'd learned to navigate those situations with grace, never letting anger consume him. But tonight, the officer's aggressive demeanor and the blatant fishing expedition felt different, more pointed. Davies, on the other hand, was struggling. He was the son of a police officer, pressured to follow in his father's footsteps. He had joined the force eager to make a difference, but the reality of the job was far more complicated than he had imagined. He felt overwhelmed, underappreciated, and constantly reminded of his own perceived inadequacies. He was also deeply insecure. He saw success as a zero-sum game. Every time someone else rose, it felt like he was falling behind. He struggled with authority, both respecting it and wielding it. The pressure to prove himself, coupled with his insecurities, often led him to overcompensate, to act tougher than he felt. He harbored unconscious biases that he had never fully examined, biases that were reinforced by the environment he worked in. Tonight, fueled by stress and a need to assert control, those biases were bubbling to the surface. He saw Marcus's expensive car, his tailored suit, and the quiet confidence in his eyes. He saw a challenge to his authority, a subtle reminder of his own perceived shortcomings. He told himself he was just doing his job, but deep down, he knew he was acting out of something more complex, something he didn't fully understand. Marcus took a measured breath and stepped out into the downpour. Water instantly plastered his hair to his forehead. He kept his hands visible. "Officer," he said, his voice calm and level, "I understand you're doing your job. I'm happy to cooperate fully. I'll submit to any test you deem necessary." Davies smirked, a fleeting expression that revealed more insecurity than malice. "That's not your call to make. Hands on the hood." "Now." Marcus hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. This felt wrong, like a deliberate escalation. He knew his rights, but he also knew that asserting them could make things worse. He reluctantly turned and placed his hands on the cold, wet metal. Davies approached from behind, his presence unnecessarily imposing. He ran his hands roughly over Marcus's back, his touch lingering a beat too long near his waist. "Spread your legs," he barked. Marcus gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to argue. He complied, his body tense. He squeezed his eyes shut, focusing on controlling his anger. Davies paused his search, his hand lingering near Marcus's inner jacket pocket. "What's this?" he said, his voice laced with suspicion. He reached in and pulled out a small, leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold-plated badge gleamed in the dim light. "Internal Affairs Division, Investigator." The blood drained from Davies's face. He snapped the wallet shut, his hands trembling. He shoved it back into Marcus's pocket with a jerky motion. What is this?" he stammered, his bravado evaporating. Marcus turned slowly, his gaze steady. Rain streamed down his face, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. "That, officer, is what you should have verified before you initiated this stop. I'm Investigator Marcus Hayes, Internal Affairs. And you, Officer Davies, are about to explain your actions." Davies's jaw worked silently. He glanced around as if searching for an escape. I didn't know," he mumbled. "I thought. You thought what, officer?" Marcus pressed, his voice dangerously soft. "That you could harass someone because of the car they drive? Because of their skin color? Because you felt like it? That your badge gave you that right?" Davies's eyes darted away. He swallowed hard, the silence stretching between them. "Show me your identification, officer," Marcus said, his voice regaining its authority. "And I strongly advise you to be truthful." Davies, defeated, fumbled for his wallet and handed over his police identification. Marcus took it, examining it closely. Then, he activated the voice recorder on his phone. The red light blinked to life. "Officer Kevin Davies," Marcus stated clearly, his voice cutting through the rain. "I am initiating a formal complaint against you for abuse of power, unlawful search, and discriminatory harassment. You have the right to remain silent." As Marcus recited Davies's rights, the young officer's carefully constructed facade crumbled. The desperation in his eyes was palpable. "Investigator Hayes, please," Davies pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "It was a mistake. I have a family. A career. Don't do this." Marcus remained unmoved, his face an impassive mask. "Those are considerations you should have made before you violated your oath, officer. Your actions have consequences." He continued to record, meticulously documenting every detail. He instructed Davies to request a supervisor. Davies, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped his radio, made the call. The air crackled with tension, punctuated only by the relentless rain. Marcus stood silently, a figure of quiet authority. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived, sirens muted out of respect for an officer call. Sergeant Miller, a veteran with a weathered face and weary eyes, stepped out. He approached his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Davies, what in God's name is going on here?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. Davies stammered, attempting to explain, his words tumbling over each other. "Sergeant, this man, he's with Internal Affairs. I pulled him over for a cracked taillight and—" Sergeant Miller's gaze snapped to Marcus, his eyes widening in recognition. "Investigator Hayes? What's the meaning of this?" Marcus calmly presented his credentials, his tone respectful but firm. "Officer Davies initiated an unlawful stop, subjected me to an unwarranted search, and engaged in discriminatory behavior. I am filing a formal complaint." Sergeant Miller listened intently, his face growing increasingly grim. He'd had his suspicions about Davies. He'd seen the subtle biases, the overzealousness. He'd warned him. This confirmed his worst fears. He turned to Davies, his disappointment evident. "Davies, you know damn well this isn't how we operate," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Badge and weapon." Now. Davies hung his head, the weight of his actions crushing him. He knew he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. While Sergeant Miller processed the scene, Marcus called David. "David, it's Marcus. I'm going to be significantly late. Got detained. Long story. Can you run point?" David, sensing the gravity in Marcus's voice, assured him he'd handle it. He knew Marcus well enough to know that something serious had transpired. Back on the roadside, Sergeant Miller assured Marcus that a full and impartial investigation would be conducted. He apologized profusely for Davies's behavior, emphasizing that it was not representative of the department as a whole. "Investigator Hayes, we take these allegations very seriously. Officer Davies will be held accountable for his actions. I assure you." Marcus nodded, acknowledging Sergeant Miller's words. He recognized that change was slow, but he also knew that good officers like Miller were essential to the process. After providing a detailed statement, Marcus was finally free to leave. He arrived at the investor meeting nearly 2 hours late, his suit rumpled and soaked, his nerves frayed. David met him at the door, his face etched with concern. "Marcus, what happened? Are you all right?" Marcus offered a brief, sanitized version of the evening's events. "I'm fine, David. Minor complication. Let's go sell them on the dream." Despite his disheveled appearance and the significant delay, the investors were surprisingly understanding. David had skillfully managed the situation, emphasizing the importance of Marcus's vision. Marcus delivered his presentation with a fire that surprised even himself. He channeled his anger and frustration into his words, his passion igniting the room. He emphasized the importance of building a company that reflected the values of fairness, equality, and opportunity. The investors were captivated. They saw the brilliance of his idea, the strength of his character, and the potential for extraordinary growth. By the end of the presentation, they were ready to invest. The meeting concluded with firm handshakes and enthusiastic agreements. Marcus had secured the funding. He had saved Innovate Solutions. As he and David stepped out into the cool night air, David clapped him on the back. "You did it, Marcus! Against all odds, you pulled it off." Marcus managed a weak smile. "It shouldn't have had to happen that way, David. No one deserves that kind of treatment." David nodded solemnly. "I know. But you showed them what you're made of. You turned a potential disaster into a triumph." The next morning, Marcus received a call from Chief Thompson. He requested a meeting to discuss the incident with Officer Davies. Marcus arrived at police headquarters, his stomach churning with a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew this meeting would be pivotal. Chief Thompson greeted him with a serious, almost apologetic expression. He led Marcus into his office and gestured to a chair. "Investigator Hayes," Chief Thompson began, his voice low and grave. "I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for the actions of Officer Davies. His behavior was reprehensible and does not reflect the values of this department." Marcus listened in silence, his gaze unwavering. We have conducted a thorough investigation, Chief Thompson continued. Officer Davies has been terminated from his position, effective immediately. We are also recommending that his police certification be permanently revoked. Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. But there's more, Chief Thompson said, his voice hardening. Our investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of misconduct. Davies has a history of biased policing, targeting minorities, and abusing his authority. We are now reviewing all of his past stops and interactions to identify any other victims. Marcus felt a surge of anger. He had suspected that Davies's behavior was not an isolated incident, but the scope of his misconduct was even more appalling than he had imagined. We are committed to weeding out corruption and bias within our ranks, Chief Thompson declared, his voice ringing with conviction. We will not tolerate officers who betray the public trust. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with Marcus's. Investigator Hayes, your actions have exposed a deeply troubling problem within our department. You have done this city a great service. And, as a demonstration of our commitment to change, I would like to offer you a unique opportunity, a temporary appointment as a special advisor to the police department. We need your expertise in internal affairs to help us reform our policies and procedures, to build a more just and equitable police force. Marcus stared at him, stunned. He had never considered working with the police. He was an entrepreneur, a businessman. But he knew that this was a chance to make a real difference, to ensure that what happened to him wouldn't happen to anyone else. He hesitated, weighing the potential consequences. He knew that accepting the position would make him a target, and that he would face criticism from all sides. But he also knew that silence was not an option. He met Chief Thompson's gaze, his eyes filled with a newfound resolve. I accept your offer, Chief, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. I will do everything in my power to help you build a police department that serves and protects all citizens equally. Marcus's decision sparked controversy. Some lauded him as a hero, while others accused him of betrayal. He ignored the noise, focusing on the task at hand. He understood the skepticism. Trust had to be earned. He began by immersing himself in the department's policies and procedures. He spent hours reviewing data, analyzing arrest records, and interviewing officers. He discovered systemic biases embedded within the training programs and protocols. He saw how well-intentioned policies could be misinterpreted and misapplied, leading to discriminatory outcomes. He worked closely with Chief Thompson to implement reforms. They introduced mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, revised use of force policies, and established a civilian oversight board to review complaints against the police. He championed community policing initiatives, encouraging officers to build relationships with residents and fostering a sense of trust. The changes weren't easy. He faced resistance from some officers who were resistant to change, and who felt that their authority was being undermined. He had to navigate political obstacles and bureaucratic red tape. But he persevered, driven by his commitment to creating a more just and equitable system. Slowly, things began to shift. The number of complaints against police officers decreased, and community relations improved. There was a renewed sense of accountability within the department. 1 year later, Officer Davies was brought to trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He was convicted on multiple counts of civil rights violations and sentenced to a significant prison term. The verdict sent a clear message: abuse of power would not be tolerated. As Davies was led away in handcuffs, he looked at Marcus, a flicker of something that might have been regret in his eyes. Marcus returned to Innovate Solutions, a changed man. His experience with the police department deepened his understanding of the complexities of justice and the importance of civic engagement. He continued to champion diversity and inclusion within his company, creating opportunities for people from all backgrounds. He never forgot the rain-soaked night on the side of the road, the night that changed his life. It served as a constant reminder of the work that remained to be done, the fight for equality that never truly ends. He continued to mentor young people, sharing his story and inspiring them to become agents of change in their communities. He didn't explicitly preach about justice or fairness. He lived it. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He understood that real change came not from grand pronouncements, but from the accumulation of small, consistent acts of courage and integrity. Years later, reflecting on his journey, Marcus understood that the true victory wasn't just about punishing one bad officer. It was about creating a system where such behavior was less likely to occur in the first place. It was about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and accountability. It was about building a society where everyone, regardless of their race or background, had the opportunity to thrive. And that, he knew, was a fight worth fighting.